بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. نرحب بكم في الجلسة الثانية والمعنونة بإدارة النقدية وتحديات تمويل المشاريع، والتي تعقد ضمن الملتقى السعودي الثاني للماليين لعام 2013 بتنظيم الهيئة السعودية للمحاسبين القانونيين. الجلسة سوف يشارك فيها عدد من المختصين. من اليمين الأستاذ فواز الفواز، نائب الرئيس للمالية في شركة سابق، والسيد عرفان سيد، رئيس تمويل الشركات في سامبا كابيتال. ولظروف خاصة سوف يحل الأستاذ مانيش منشيدة بدلاً من الأستاذ فهد السديري، والأستاذ مانيش منشيدة هو يعمل في تمويل الشركات في التريجري في الشركة السعودية للكهرباء. سوف نبدأ هذه الجلسة بمحاضرة من الأستاذ عرفان سيد، وهو يعمل في سامبا كابيتال منذ 2001، ويعمل حالياً كرئيس لوحدة التمويل الشركات. He joined Samba Financial Group in 2002 and currently heads the corporate finance business in Samba Capital. From 1996 until joining Samba, Irfan worked in project and structured finance team at ANZ Bank, Australia and New Zealand, Mumbai. Prior to joining ANZ, Irfan gained specialization in energy sector while working in ISVF resource in Washington, D.C. He graduated from Wilson University, Connecticut in 1993 with a Bachelor in Business and Economics and Bachelor in Economics and Mathematics. In 1996, he received his MA Master in Economics from Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. طبعاً, I have something in common with Mr. Irfan. I used to live in Washington, D.C. and in Australia, as he worked in these two cities. نسأله please, Mr. Irfan, present your lecture within the time limit, which is 15 minutes.
Assalamu alaikum and good morning to all of you. It is a pleasure to be in your midst. What I would like to do over the next 10-15 minutes is provide you with an overview of the typical sources of financing which are available to Saudi corporates. I will take you from the most basic sort of source of financing, which is in the bank market, to the more sophisticated elements of financing. What will happen after this is that Mr. Fawaz al-Fawaz and Mr. Manish Manchandia will actually give you a more detailed sort of a outline of the process, because in the Saudi space, these are two of the most sophisticated corporates. Not only have they accessed the different sources of financing within Saudi Arabia, they have also accessed the international debt capital markets, which is the natural progression for corporates as they develop. The first element, as I mentioned, would be the bank and capital market overview within Saudi Arabia. If you look towards the charts out there, what you will see is that the syndicated volumes, in other words, when you actually move for your debt requirements beyond a certain level, it is not possible for one bank to provide that funding. And this is typically for the large corporates and the public sector. They typically put together a group of banks, and that is when you call it a syndicated. So you'll have more than two, sometimes up to 10 or 15 banks participating to provide financing on the same terms and conditions. You'll see from here that the peak of the market in Saudi Arabia was in 2007-2008. And that was to a large extent because you had a natural gas allocation to petrochemical companies, and you had mega projects at that time. I recall working with Abu Muhammad Mr. Fawaz al-Fawaz, at that time, on the largest syndicated project finance deal in the world at that time. This was the $10 billion Saudi Kayan transaction. At that time, I recall we had all the 10 Saudi banks and something like 20 international banks which took place. And you're actually seeing that reflected in 2007, 2008. After that, we had the financial crisis, and in general, whilst the Saudi banks were not severely affected, I think the international sort of atmosphere came down to Saudi Arabia too. And you're actually seeing that in 2009, 2010. There's been a downward trend in terms of the banking assets for two reasons. One is that corporates, in general, put a lot of their CapEx plans on hold, and the Saudi banks themselves became very cautious. We are now at a stage where we are actually moving out of this. You'll actually see this both in the bank market, in the debt capital market space, and also in the equity markets. I will show that to you in the following slides. This trend, as I talked about, is being reflected here in terms of the decline in banking volumes. You've seen this is the growth in banking assets, and we are now at a stage where we are probably at the lowest point. Indications are that there is going to be an increase in this. One of the reasons why there was a mismatch was that banks had a lot of liquidity, but that liquidity was not being deployed. Very often it would be the public sector and the really top-notch names which could command a premium, and they have accessed the bank markets. What we've actually seen has been a dearth of the private sector accessing the bank markets for two reasons, as I mentioned before, because of a general hesitation in terms of taking on CapEx, and the banks have also been reluctant. We are now at a stage where banks have deployed assets, and the loan deposit ratios are moving up. So what has happened is that in the next couple of years, we will see that the banks, whilst they will remain liquid, the pricing will go up. There is a lot of liquidity available, not just in the bank market, but across investors in KSA as well. You'll see this in the equity markets. From the beginning of the year, there was a spike. There was an increase of almost 1,000 points on the TASI. It has now normalized and come back, but overall, there has been about a 5.6% increase in the stock markets. A very clear indicator of the investors' sort of a hesitation in terms of committing on the equity side is the money markets. What you'll see from December 2006 to the end of 2012 is that the investors have been deploying roughly about 70% of their investable reserves in money markets. Money markets, as you may be aware, is a short-term instrument which is effectively like a bank deposit. It is invested in short term. It gives you liquidity. The type of returns are about 70 basis points to 1%. But they have actually reallocated their portfolio so that in the last 5 years, they have changed their allocation from equities, which was 70% at that time, to 70% money markets. This is a reflection of the cautiousness in the Saudi market, in large part dictated by international events. Now, if you look at the lower end of this chart, what you will actually see is that in the last few years, there has been a concerted effort, both by corporates, by the regulator, to essentially diversify away from the bank market into the capital markets. Now, a pioneer in that field was SABIC. I mean, they established the Sukuk, which was really the benchmark at that time in terms of moving away from the bank market. But, you know, the fact is that the Saudi capital markets are still in the infancy. And what happens is, and I'll show you in the following slide, that despite going into the debt capital markets, roughly about 70 to 80% of the demand still comes from the banks. So you haven't really diversified, because unlike the Western or the developed debt capital markets, where you have a group of investors which are insurance companies, pension funds, Really, in the Saudi market, what you have is still very, very much bank-centric, and those people that have accessed the debt capital markets have invariably been corporates which have established very strong relationships with the banks themselves. The only diversification you'll see would be government institutions. They typically take between 15 to 20% of any sort of a debt capital markets or sukuk offerings. There is very little interest from asset managers because their mandate requires that they only invest in short-term securities. So, whilst we are progressing along the path of debt capital markets, we are still not at that stage where we have a huge or liquid pool of investors. I'm not going to spend too much time on the equity markets because, this is a source of financing which is only available to those corporates which are listed on the Tadawul. Typically, to be listed on the Tadawul, there's a whole series of requirements. You have to be a joint stock company. You have to demonstrate that you have several years of profitable returns before you are allowed to go IPO. But once you do go IPO, you have access to the equity capital markets. You can access, through rights issues. You can buy and sell your share. So this gives you a great deal of flexibility from a corporate perspective to fund your capex when you are at a stage when leverage is constrained. Now, this is an interesting chart because what it actually shows you is that from the peaks in 2007, 2008, when you had in 2008 roughly about 36 billion riyals of equity which was listed on the Tadawul, you are at a stage where it has come down from 36 to about 8 billion. And the reason for that is that there is generally a concern by the regulator and amongst corporates that given the sort of valuations which you will get in the market, given what is happening in the international space, may not reflect the true value of a company. But having said that, what we have actually seen in the last year is very heartening because you've had a couple of very large IPOs which have come out. The largest one last year was Al Tayyar IPO, over 1 billion riyals. And what you'll actually see is that here you had a peak in 2007, and now you are back to a stage where whilst the overall volumes are down, the size of the deal is increasing. From the average size, which was about 2.8 billion per issuer, you went down to something like 363, and now you are slowly coming up again. And what you'll actually see is that the investor confidence is also coming back because after, this is the oversubscription line. It fell down to 2.2 in 2011. In other words, for every 100 million riyals of equity which was offered, there was only 200 million. It's gone up to 6. That means that there is now genuine interest amongst the public, amongst the investors, because they see a lot of good value in terms of companies which are listing. There is confidence which is returned to the Saudi market. We expect that this trend will continue. This is just a chart which will actually indicate to you, again, this shows up very clearly out here. In terms of oversubscription, companies were barely being able to cover their IPOs. If you look at some of the recent IPOs, Dallah Healthcare, Saudi Catering, Al Tayyar, and Tareen, you've actually seen that there is a lot of oversubscription. In other words, there is a lot of pent-up demand amongst the investors, and we are seeing them move their portfolio allocation from money markets into the equity capital markets. I suspect, Mr. Chairman, that I am very close to the end of my time. So what I will conclude with is this chart which essentially summarizes what I was talking about before. We essentially, for the Saudi corporates, you have, as I mentioned, the local syndicated bank market, which is liquid. You have banks out here which are very, very familiar with corporates. They're comfortable with the Saudi growth prospects. Typically, corporates will access the syndicated market for 5 to 7 years. Okay, this is the same sort of a tenor which you will see in the Saudi market, with the exception of GACA, which was guaranteed by the Ministry of Finance. The longest tenor which we've had is 7 years. That benchmark was first established by SEC. And in terms of ratings and disclosures, certainly you need to be a joint stock company, and you need to have a fairly high degree of disclosure before you access the capital markets, because the amount of disclosure is obviously a very important element from a CMA regulator perspective, because they will be accessing not just the sophisticated investors, such as the banks and corporates. In the event that the Sukuk is publicly listed, it is also accessible by individual citizens. In fact, I recall Abu Muhammad, Mr. Fawaz al-Fawaz, being one of the very few investors, retail investors, in the SABIC Sukuk when it came out. I think it was about maybe 3 or 4 investors, and you were one of them. So this is obviously, going to change, because as we have disclosures, ratings, all of these developments in the market, there is a great amount of disclosure. There is more confidence amongst the investors and the regulators, and that is the local debt markets. The international debt capital markets requires ratings by S&P and Moody's, which again only a handful of corporates have. Typically, corporates will access the international debt capital markets for long tenors, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Manish is going to be talking something about that, because as SEC, they have long-term assets, and they need to also access debt which matches the tenor of the assets. This is very, very important. As we talked about, typically in the local Saudi debt markets, the tenor is quite constrained. And international debt capital markets also gives you access to dollars. The Saudi banks can only lend in riyals. They have difficulty in lending dollars. This is what you get when you move to the international debt capital markets. And finally, you have the rights issue. I've talked about that. Gentlemen, I thank you for your time and attention, and we'll be happy to take questions at the end of the presentations. Thank you very much.
نشكر الأستاذ عرفان سيد على هذه المعلومات العامة عن الكابيتال ماركت أو عن الفاينانشال كابيتال ماركت في السعودية. طبعا الأسئلة راح تكون في نهاية الجلسة، فإذا كان فيه أسئلة حتى مكتوبة ممكن من الآن ترسل لنا. طبعا الورقة الثانية سوف يقدمها الأستاذ فواز محمد الفواز، وهي بعنوان التحديات والنقدية والتمويل. الأستاذ فواز يشغل حاليا منصب نائب الرئيس للمالية في الشركة السعودية للصناعات الأساسية سابق، وهو عضو في مجلس إدارة شركة سابق للاستثمارات المحدودة، وكذلك عضو مجلس إدارة شركة ينبع الوطنية للبتروكيماويات ينساب. طبعا الأخ فواز شغل عدد من المناصب في السابق، منها مدير عام المالية ومدير عام الخدمات المحاسبية. من الأشياء الإنجازات التي تذكر في هذا المجال للأستاذ فواز مساهمته في حصول شركة سابق على أول تصنيف ائتماني عام 2005 والسنوات التي تليها، وكذلك مساهمته في تطبيق أنظمة المعلومات المالية والمحاسبية في شركة سابق، وأصدار سابق للصكوك، واكتتابي شركة ينساب وكيان وتمويل مشاريعهم. طبعا الأستاذ فواز حاصل على شهادة البكالوريوس في المحاسبة والمالية من جامعة الملك سعود، وحضر عديد من الدورات المتخصصة في القيادة والإدارة والبرامج المالية. نترككم مع الأخ فواز لمدة 15 دقيقة عن هذا الموضوع، التحديات والنقدية والتمويل.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. مساكم الله بالخير وصباحكم بالخير وستيل الصباح. I hope you enjoy the previous presentations and cafe break. I'd like to thank the SOCBA team and Mr. Maghamis and Dr. Jabbar for inviting me to share with you some of our experience on the treasury and the finance at SABIC. Corporate finance, we call it as a necklace of a corporate. Any corporate need to corporate finance to manage the strategic and debt raising to fund strategic investment of growth, liquidity and risk management, managing return of the stakeholders, and financial and management reporting. Corporate finance always shape up, the balance sheet of corporate and give the corporate the opportunity to grow by funding and managing the cash. Treasury optimization is a must. We really need to always think of optimizing the treasury functions to ensure we are really meeting our stakeholders' requirements. In order to do that, we really need a strong partnership with businesses. Today, partnership is important. It's not just only providing some information but actually giving some advice and strategic advice, to the business, ensuring sufficient capacity access to fund growth. As you know, growth is really the heart of an organization. So in order to achieve the appropriate growth, you need to have a reasonable, competitive funding, to support that growth. Provide businesses with tools to help to compete, as you know, today with the global economy, which we've seen from this morning presentation from Saeed al-Sheikh. We touch base on the global economy challenges, and which the companies and organizations need to be ready to ensure that, they have the capability to manage that. Risk management and control, as you see, we always, been through a difficult time from the credit crunches, during 2007, 2008, and we have the global economy and Eurozone, some of the sufferance rating is downgraded, and so on. So we need really to ensure that, we have really strong risk management and control in place. People and human resources is a key, to have the right people, the capabilities, to achieve that. It's really very important. So liquidity and debt management is the backbone to fund growth and deliver return to shareholders. Managing global corporate finance is really important and sophisticated today. It's not really like before. I'm going to just to tackle one of those, pillars, which is the liquidity and debt management. It's very important to have the treasury are capable with enough tools, with our systems or peoples, to manage the treasury and the debt raising. SABIC today manage $40 billion plus around the globe from cash and debt. And we have really two centers. We have one center called SABIC Capital Treasury, managing the international cash pooling and debt management, located in Amsterdam. And we have the key treasury managed cash and debt portfolios in KSA. Actually, when we have that set up to help us to optimize the tax exposures we have, around our business, around the globe. As you know, we have in Saudi Arabia, we have a very, we say tax-free in a way, and we have the best location to manage the cash and debt in general. Cash management is really a lot of challenges comes around around that concept. One of it is really to have the robust IT architecture to run and sustain an integrated cash management system to optimize liquidity. So people talking about treasury systems, ERP system, SAP, the most important is really to have the reliable and transactional cost competitiveness and ERP system in this regard to play a really critical role. Internal control, check and balances must be in place. As you know, some of us, today talk about the IFRS and, the SOCPA regulations and CMA regulations, etc. So I think, to have the right system and the right balance between, the control and regulation is important. Cash investment, is really important today. With this risk, you need to balance that's cash available for investment with its risk. Foreign exchange exposure is one also of the risk need to be managed. And, in order to manage that, you need to have full feasibilities and full, process in place to ensure that, okay, you have an overview of your cash balances and cash requirements. Effective consolidated treasury, it's one of the tools we find, to manage, to help to manage the cash effectively. Whether, to have strengthen governance, you need to have the governance policies, guidelines in place. Enhancing treasury system, we touch base, to increase standardization, processes, micromanagement. Working capital optimization, whether it's receivable, payable, inventory, you need really to have a very integrated system and visibilities on those balances to ensure that, okay, it's managed effectively. Enhancing liquidity management to improve cash flow forecast through scenarios planning, ensuring effective cash management. As you know, today is really, one of the difficult really part is really to have a robust, strong projection system available, which sometimes, having the information, it need to be available on time, real time, and you need really to ensure that, okay, those information are cleansed and quality data to help on the decision support. As I said, to continue in the consolidation treasury, I think it's very important to have a clear shared vision, consolidated, visions and resources. You need to have manage the pressure of change and to achieve, the change of to have something sustainable and to improve the performance of the cash available for the investment. Integrated cash management is a key. We should really keep the right number of banks, not more, not less. People intend now to reduce number of banking relationship to leverage pricing, services, and global capabilities. Sorry to some of our guys here from the banks, but we really need to be mindful to the maintenance of the banking accounts and number of banks you are dealing with, so in order to leverage on the relationship to get the right price and the right return to our shareholders. Landscape, for bank communication is a key. SABIC start, the processes to have full automated process, for their operations, whether in Saudi Arabia or outside, Saudi Arabia. We are really now, introducing the SWIFT and, other tools being deployed in Saudi Arabia and Europe, and other region will follow. That's, covering, the cash management, which is, in our opinion, cash management is very important, for any organization to ensure that, okay, the health of that organization and the growth and, the return and shareholders are met. Project finance is really the other, the other leg of, of the cash management. There are, some critical, elements which need to really be managed and understood from the borrower perspective. When we talk about, project finance or corporate finance or funding, the growth, we always talk about tenor and pricing, which just really take us some time to negotiate with our colleagues, on the banks, on the financial advisors, on financial, legal counsels, etc. So all the borrowers, they need really to have a very competitive price with long tenor as much as they can. And the banks, or the lenders will try to control over cash flow and security. So you need really to balance that. So you need really to be capable, to be really, have enough information, transparency, to ensure that, okay, you get, the optimal, price and tenor. Some of the success factors, we really, found it's very important. You need to have strong sponsorship, financial and economical viabilities, execution and operational track record, safety and environment standards, return, to the shareholders. Some of those banks are really challenging, some of those, whether, acquiring for safety requirements, environmental, some of the technical advisors, etc. And SABIC introduced innovations and world-class Islamic tranches and project financing during YNSAB and Saudi Kayan, which was mentioned by my colleague Irfan. We really, introduce a very innovation product when we create, establish YNSAB and followed by Kayan. Whether it's, it's including IBOs, it's including, project financing, ACAs, BIF, SIDF, syndications, all of the above. And that's really, put a good footprint, for corporate, in Saudi Arabia to, to have a model and a process in place, to follow and also to further, develop. Project finance option remain open, although, the market trend is pushing against it, because, we have, as we said, we still really lucky in KSA and, some of other regions like Japan and maybe a few others, but it really becomes very difficult for the European and American banks who actually, ask to participate on those long-term financing because of the limitation of liquidities and, the difficulty they're having, in addition to the requirement of the increased bank capital ratios under Basel III. We think this is another challenge we need to really be mindful for, and, we need really to ensure that, our needs from funding is really available and the appetite, is there. So my colleague mentioned that, the debt market is very important. I agree with him 100%. When we do our benchmark ourselves as SABIC, a global company, with some of other, peers in the world, whether it's called PSF in Germany or Dow in the US, or DuPont, we found ourselves, depending heavily in our relationship bank. It's something like 60 to 70%, from the banks. 20%, 30%, comes from debt market, which are they having the vice versa. They're actually, depending on debt market by about 80% plus, and 10 to 15% comes from the relationship banks. Just imagine. So I think that trend needs really to be looked at, and we need really to work together with our CMA colleagues, with our banks and, other, investors to have, the right process and the right documentation, in place to help, the corporate to have, the reasonable funding. Basel III, as I said, it is really a challenge, in my opinion, for the banks, and, they are going to ask for more securities, more, will have, more than equity, they're going to ask for equities, etc. And just imagine, even, the local banks today is start to fund some of their requirement from the debt market. We've seen some of the local banks issue some sukuk, some bonds, from time to time. So I think, with this Basel III, we are gonna really facing a lot of challenges. So international banks are selling assets and avoid large commitment, as I mentioned. And they have to really increase equity and reduce loan assets, which in this case, we will find it quite really challenging, on the future. Before I conclude, I'm sure, I came, to the end. I'm just trying to summarize, 3 to 4, challenges ahead of us. When it comes, the cash management, we think that, we need to think of the optimal cash available or to be maintained on the level of, of the corporate. Optimal yield, which this cash available for investment could generate versus its, its risks. We need to balance that. And third one is really the capabilities and the human resource. I think we need to pay attention, to that. When we talk about the project finance or corporate finance, we have also, some challenges which we need really to focus on. You need to have, transparency, information. We need to have process in place and system, to support us, to do our modeling and our projections. We need to have a strong, robust projection system, and to have, the right information available. Third is really to, to improve our relationship, with our, colleagues in the relationship banks, on the ACAs, on the BIF and SIDF. So I think we have a very good operating model already in place, as I mentioned, whether you mentioned YNSAB, mentioning Kayan, and we've seen some issuance from our colleagues from the electricities and Aramco and others, which I think that it's really gonna help us to move to the other level, which is the tapping the debt market, which I think with the liquidity today and the CMA support and our governance in place, I think really there is a huge opportunities to improve and also to tap in the sukuk market, which we should help our scholar committees to understand the requirements and to help them to have the right documentation in place. With that, I'd like to thank you very much for your listening, and I will be ready to answer any questions after my colleagues' presentation. Thank you so much.
نشكر الأستاذ فواز على هذه المعلومات وهذه الكم الهائل من المعلومات القيمة والتي الحقيقة تنبي عن خبرة ثرية. نتمنى أن ونفخر بوجود مثل هذه الزملاء معنا في هذه المشاركات وبوجودهم على شركات عملاقة مثل سابك. نتمنى لهم التوفيق وأن يستمروا في مشاركة هذه المعلومات والعلوم إلى النكست جنريشن. الحقيقة الورقة الثالثة أو البرزنتيشن الثالث سوف يكون من الأستاذ مانيش مانشنديا وسوف تكون بعنوان Case Study of SEC Saudi Electricity Company Financing. طبعا الأستاذ مانيش is currently heading the corporate finance with SEC Treasury. He has extensive experience in treasury, particularly in debt raising, and have been involved in debt raising activity of more than Saudi Riyal 4 billion from local and international market, covering the various product categories. He has an MBA in finance, so please, Mr. Anchidja, go ahead, and within 15 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to speak at this prestigious conference. Thanks a lot to my colleagues, both Fawaz and Irfan, for giving such insightful views of the current market challenges and how they are coping with them. What I would like to do is, I would like to take up these challenges that they have raised, and I would like to show from an example of the similar challenges that we as a company are facing and how we are managing those challenges from our perspective. Now, you talk about project finance or corporate finance, the essential essence of the challenge remains the same, which applies to the entire financing activity. And what I would like to take is, what is the objective of SEC's financing policy? Well, the primary objective of corporate finance is to maximize the shareholder value. And how do you do it is by ensuring you raise lowest possible cost of sustainable debt. Now, very important to use the word sustainable, because at times, in various years, you might have a year where you have very low cost of debt, then you see peaks the other year. So it's very important to ensure on an average, you try to achieve a lowest possible sustainable cost. Diversification of funding sources, it is very important for us because we don't want to clog ourselves with one particular source of funding. We want to retain the flexibility to tap into the various sources of funding as our desire. Increase the maturity profile of our financing. This is primarily for us because we have longer dated assets. Our assets are more than 25 years in nature, so we prefer to match the asset with liabilities and try to have longer dated financings. Then ensuring the availability of enough liquidity to sustain at times of market events. Now, this particularly is not applicable as of now in the Saudi context. But if we focus on the international markets or the global markets, if we go back to the events of 2008, 2009, there was a dearth of liquidity. There was low confidence among the banks, among themselves. So we saw times where this liquidity resulted in a lot of negative movements in the market. Now, we as a company have ensured that we always keep in place the committed lines necessary so that our business is not affected by any adverse market movements. Just to give you a small background on SEC's financing. SEC was formed in 2000 by merging of the old regional electricity companies with an objective of creating a centralized entity responsible for the overall development of the power sector in the country and ensuring the quality of supply. Now, since establishment, there has been a tremendous change in the spending pattern of the company, which has generally been in line to meet the demand of the country. Now, we have a responsibility to provide adequate infrastructure to meet the demand targets of the kingdom. So our spending pattern have generally been in line with those demand forecasts. Back in 2006, 2005, 2006, we were starting to see a trend of increased spending activity. So a lot of questions came into our mind, and we realized that we needed to tackle this at the quickest possible pace. And the question was, how would we manage the future requirements? How would we ensure that there is sufficient market capacity available in the future to meet all our requirements? And as a result, we took certain steps. We formed certain strategies. And the first strategy was ratings. We identified that credit ratings are going to be a key objective for us as a company. And we got ourselves rated back in 2006. And the outcome of the entire process was very positive, as we were rated at par with the sovereign, which is at AA-. Ratings opened new doors for us because it opened opportunities for us in the debt capital markets as well as in the international markets. So following our ratings, we went straight to the market to tap our first local debt capital market transaction in 2007. Previously to 2007, we relied primarily on bank market funding. But once we got ourselves rated, we went to the capital market and we got an overwhelming response from the Saudi capital market. Capital market in general are an important source of liquidity for any corporate because capital market is a price discovery mechanism. So you have to follow a book building process, which is a function of supply and demand, and as well as the relative value that a particular security offers in terms of investment. So it helps in a very good price discovery. Following the capital market transaction, we focused on the ECA market, which is the export credit agency related financings. Now, ECAs have become very important post-2008 because there was a liquidity crunch primarily in the European bank market as well as with some of the American banks. And ECAs then went on to occupy a prominent role in the overall international funding. Now, ECAs generally support the exporters to their exports to an importing country. And as our business of heavy industry business, we do have a lot of assets which are turbines or similar assets are imported from these manufacturers which are located in various parts in the world. Now, the advantage of doing an ECA financing is because these governments, I would say, used to be AAA rated. Now their AAA rating have dwindled in the last 2-3 years. But because of the AAA ratings, they used to get a preferred cost of funding, which was passed on to the borrower. So we decided at ECA funding to be an important source of activity for us, and we tapped the market for the first ECA transaction in 2009. Since then, we did the next natural step in our progression, which was to tap the international debt capital markets. International debt capital markets are, in the last 12 months, have been extremely liquid, and we have seen 2012 to be a year of record issuers in the international debt capital markets. International debt capital markets generally offer longer maturities. I mean, you can tap the market for more than 10, 15, even 30 years, or even a perpetual bond is possible in the international debt capital markets. And we have seen issuers from our region, from Dubai, from Abu Dhabi, from Qatar, tapping the international debt capital markets very frequently up to the tenors of up to 30 years. So it was decided as a company that we would want to focus on this source of funding, and as a result, we went to the market in 2012 and did our first international debt capital market transaction. Now, coming back onto the challenges which some of my colleagues raised, what are the key challenges that faced almost all corporates? First is liquidity. Second is cost of borrowing, especially over longer tenors, and with the impact that Basel III might have in the future, this challenge will increase further in the future. Lengthening of maturity, especially in our case that we want our debt to be longer dated. And funding constraints like the single obligor limits. Now this is, from a regulatory perspective, it's a good risk management strategy by the regulator, but from a corporate perspective, this is something that we have to manage as corporates and try to work our way around, and how do we utilize our limits effectively with our banks. Now, what the steps we have taken to manage this, I'm not referring to our is the best practices and something that everybody should follow, but this is more evolving process where it keeps on evolving every year as we try and tap new things. So how we responded to these challenges? First was ratings. We do manage our ratings very actively. Ratings are extremely important for the company. We do have regular contacts with our analysts in the agencies who are covering us. We enjoy sovereign ratings from Standard & Poor's and Fitch. We enjoy a very high A1 rating from Moody's, so we are rated by all three major international rating agencies. Management is extremely focused on the ratings, and we do try to be transparent with the agencies and provide them all effective communication to make sure that we keep on maintaining our current ratings. Second, and very important strategy, is investor relation. It is very important to follow a no surprise policy. We have to be very regular in terms of our communication with the investors. Investors also mean our lenders in banks. We need to establish a two-way communication. We need to take their feedback always while considering a particular financing option. Investors need to be explained of the credit clearly. Their feedback should be taken into account. Use of things like non-deal roadshows or investor conferences, they particularly help the investors to understand the company better. Now, this trend of investor relations is picking up in Saudi. We are seeing more and more large corporates having established investor relations team within their companies. Regulator is doing a very good job. CMA and Tadawul both are organizing regular conferences on investor relations to educate the local corporates into following this policy more effectively within their companies. Expanding banking relation. Now, the international treasury best practice, or whatever the treasury advisors will always advise that it's always prudent to, it's always advisable to.
Mr. Manish, can you summarize in 3 minutes?
Yeah. It's very important to keep few bank relationships, but when your requirements are huge, it's very important to expand into more banks so that we don't clog into the limits. Again, I mentioned this point about diversification, so I'll not touch it again. This is a natural projection that we have seen as a company, where we started with domestic syndications back in 2004. We got ourselves rated, did the first capital market transaction. We got a price from the market, so we went back to our lender in the local market with the banks and renegotiated our facilities because we were a rated entity in 2008. 2009, we again tapped the capital markets with a domestic sukuk. Then we went and tapped ECA funding. In 2010, we have done another sukuk, and another domestic syndication. 2011, we did another ECA financing with the French authority, and 2012 was the high point of our financing strategy, where we tapped the international debt capital market for the first time, which was one of the most oversubscribed corporate sukuks in the world at that time, with a book of almost $18 billion, and it was 9 times oversubscribed. So just to summarize here, I would say it's very important to focus on the needs of the company in terms of forecasting the future, and try to manage these challenges effectively by trying to diversify and trying to increasingly tap the capital market. There is just one slide. This is the end result of whatever we have done in the last 12 years, where today majority of our debt is from the capital markets. So we're not reliant on particular banking relationships. Yeah, we really love their support, and we always have them as a backstop. But our primary source of funding over the years have turned out to be capital markets. Thank you.
نشكر الأستاذ منيش على هذه المحاضرة. طبعا الحقيقة دائما الوقت يكون ضيق، لكن إذا كان بالإمكان 5 دقائق 5 minutes for questions and comments. طبعا إذا في أسئلة مكتوبة أو أسئلة يعني شفوية. في أحد عنده مداخلة؟ يعني ما شاء الله البرزنتيشن كانت واضحة جدا.
لو سمحت.
في أحد عنده سؤال؟
هنا نعم.
وين الأخ بسمات؟ تفضل دكتور.
سؤال عام يعني موجه للجميع، ما أدري اللي يحب تيك ستاب يعني. كيف يرى أعضاء اللجنة وأعضاء الفريق توجه المملكة من ناحية نمو سوق اللي هو الديت ماركت، اللي هو اللي يسموه الصكوك، توجه نموه في المملكة، وإيش المعوقات الموجودة الآن وكيف ممكن تحل؟
طيب يمكن الأخ فوازي تولى الإجابة.
شكرا يا أخي الكريم. Thank you very much for the question. Shall I answer it in Arabic? Okay.
والله as you like. The question was in Arabic, so
okay.
You can answer it in Arabic.
Okay. This is a good question actually, and this is really what I touched base on my presentation. You know, I mean, we really need to work together as a team with our, governments, with our big corporate like SABIC, Aramco, السوكبا, شريعة سكالر, شريعة because when we talk about sukuk, I mean there is a process, need to be followed. One part of it is, we mentioned the Sharia scholar of that bank need to be approved, the product. Second, really to have, the informations available, business descriptions, we call it نشرة الإصدار إذا صح التعبير أو perspective. وبعدين, we نبدأ مباحثات مع هيئة سوق المال وتداول لعملية الطرح والتوقيت والإصدار، يعني تضمينها من ضمن لستة في التداول. So أعتقد it is a long process. For us as SABIC, to be honest, we are really taking that initiative back to 2005-06, and we start talking to the CMA. We really managed to convince them to have the process. They were very supportive in actual fact. And we issue 3 series of sukuk. We started with first one 3 billion Saudi riyal, then it will follow by the 8 billion, then 5 billion. Then I think, the door was open, large for other corporate, which they follow. So I think, the fundamental, process is there. I think we need really to have more educations, more governance in place, more awareness. I think that's very important. The credit rating is being mentioned also by my colleagues, I think we need really to have also local credit rating agencies who actually can support the credit for those companies. I think for the sponsor of a corporate like SABIC, Aramco, electricity, STC, etc., I think they're really having the capability. But we are not really just targeting those big corporate. We'd like to also to see the the medium and small companies are also coming to the to that process. Also, there is something, we need really to help and work with Tadawul to ease the process to list those sukuk and bonds on Tadawul, to make it called the secondary market in order, to sell and buy like shares. Maybe Irfan mentioned, I participate in one of Sabiq Sukuk, not just only for investment, to be honest with you, just to also to put a benchmark, saying that, guys, okay, this is really good tool to diversify your investment. Because, bonds and Sukuk, it's not like, shares. You're going to buy today and going to double or increase 20%, 30% tomorrow. But it's going to really help you to, diversify your investment and to manage your risk. You don't like to, بالعربي نقول لا تحط بيضك كله في سلة واحدة. You need really to diversify it. So I think I agree with you, Doctor. I think it is really very important. Personally, I'm committed, personal as a person who is from Sabiq. We are really going to continue our dialogue with CMA, with Tadawul, with Minister of Finance, Minister of Commerce, in order, to push and also to encourage the Sharia scholar. Personally, I talked to some of those Sheikh like Abdullah bin Mania, Abdullah Mutlaq, Gary, Al-Shibali, Al-Asaymi, trying also to bring them, to be consistent. We need to standardize as much as we can. So sometimes, some people will agree with it, some others don't agree with it. We have some difficulties sometimes from some of the banks not participating, like Al-Rajhi, like Al-Inma, like Al-Bilad, etc. So we need to come up with some product which could really gather all of those investors, in one place. But I'm quite optimistic and متفائل.
طيب, Irfan, any comments on this?
I think,
Microphone.
Thanks. Essentially, I think Fawaz has very, very clearly captured all the main elements. I think the key issue is diversification away from bank treasuries, because what happens from a corporate perspective is that every bank has a legal lending limit, which it can provide to any one single obligor. The problem that we have in the banking side is that whether it is a syndicated bank loan or a sukuk, it will still be counted towards the same limits. Now, we are having a problem with that because as the debt capital market grows, and if the reliance on the bank market stays the same, you are not really achieving the aims. I think the real important element is to develop the investor base which is typically traditional investors into sukuks or capital markets are pension funds, insurance companies, and asset managers. And this will only happen over time. I think this is clearly a focus of the regulator.
As Mr. Manish talked about challenge facing SEC in financing, one of them was credit rating. So I have a written question here saying, how does the government affect the SEC rating, which AA minus?
Thank you. The government is the majority owner of the company. Directly or indirectly, the government owns more than 81% of SEC. So yes, the government linkage to SEC is a primary strength of our ratings. And as a company, given what we do, given our responsibility or nature of our responsibility in Saudi, have been primarily related to infrastructure development, we don't expect that this relationship with the government would change in the future. So we don't expect any impacts, negative impacts on our ratings on the future.
شكرا. حقيقة معذرة بعض الأسئلة كأنها يعني investment advice فما أقدر أقرأها السابق ولا الكهرباء فإحنا ما بجمعية عمومية يعني. طيب.
Just to add to Nahish, point in the credit rating, I think, we need also, to be mindful to, to the credit rating process, because it's a healthy process. It's not easy, and, it's easy to get rated, because we at Sabiq, we get our first rating at 2005, and then carry on. I think we need also to have, the local credit rating. It's going to really a big help for the corporates if they really locally rated. I think this is going to make it easy and smoothing the process, and will help and educate, the corporate and, the investors of the credit rating. It will help also the investors, to find, and the right product for investments. So that's, I think it's also, quite important.
أنا بس ممكن ودي الأخ فوازي يعني يوضح بالضبط وش معنى يعني إيش يقصد بالزملاء اللوكال كريدت ريتنج. يعني هل معنى أنه والله الانترناشنال كريدت ريتنج ما تؤدي الغرض، خصوصا لما نتكلم عن دائما الشركات اللي يعني تطمح للكريدت ريتنج شركات يعني ذات يعني انترناشنال اوبريشنال. يعني
اخوي فواز ودي باللغه العربيه الله يسلمك، باللغه العربيه تكفى.
شكرا دكتور.
خلاص امر من الرئيس.
شكرا دكتور على الملاحظه. اعتقد انه الكريدت ريتنج هي منشآت تقريبا عالميه في العالم، يمكن الثلاثه اللي ذكرت سابقا اللي هي Standard & Poor's and Moody's and Fitch. Those the main international credit rating agencies worldwide. And it's quite يعني ومن الغريب في الامر انهم يعني ما عليهم مسؤوليه.
دكتور احمد يقول بالعربي.
طيب، الغريب في الامر ما عليهم مسؤوليات كبيره، يعني هم يعطون ريتنج يقولون هذا تقييم هالمنتج هذا وهالشركه هذا ممتاز ولا جيد ولا جيد جدا، اوكي، ولو لما تستثمر فيها وبعد سنه سنتين يصير لها اشكاليه ما تقدر تمسكهم. يعني يعطون الريتنج، يعني يعطون شو اسمه التقييم الحالي بناء على المعطيات والمتطلبات الموجوده في اليوم نفسه. طبعا هم يحاولون يجددون كل سنه، يجون اللي يعني اللي سووا التقييم هذا ويحاولون يجددون ويتاكدون، يسالون اسئله وياخذون التوقعات للمنشاه الى اخره. بالنسبه للتطرق الى عمليه التقييم المحلي، انه يكون في شركات مماثله صغيره حتى لو كانت تبدأ في عملية التقييم المحلي للشركات سواء بشكل عام أو حتى للمنتجات الاستثمارية. مثلا إذا كان هناك إصدار صكوك، إذا كان هناك إصدار سندات، إذا كان هناك طرح شركة IPO، من الضروري بمكان أن يكون هناك جهة مستقلة تماما لديها من الخبرة والإمكانيات والقدرات أنها تحلل تلك الشركة أو ذلك المنتج، زي الإصدار مثلا كان من سابق ولا كان من شركة الكهرباء ولا كان من شركة اتصالات أو من أرامكو، ويعطي رأي محدد مستقل بالكريدت أو التقييم هالمنتج هذا، هل هو بالفعل يعتبر مثلا ممتاز درجته أو جيد جدا أو جيد أو حتى يمكن أقل من ذلك. لأن في الكريدت ريتنج فيها تقريبا تبدأ من تريبل ايز which is the highest.
لا، والإضافة قصدي وش بتضيف اللوكال كريدت على الانترناشنال ايجنسي؟
حتضيف الجزئيتين. الجزئية الأولى إنه الكريدت ريتنج ايجنسيز يعني يأخذون فيز يمكن ما يتحملها بعض الشركات. الجزئية الأخرى إنه الشركات هذه تحتاج إلى معلومات هائلة جدا، بعض الأنظمة المحاسبية في بعض الشركات ليست يعني متوفرة، بينما الشركات لو كان هناك محلية يعني تقييمات محلية حتساعد كثير في توفير هالمعلومات وفي ومساعدة الأشخاص في التدريب والتأهيل بحيث أنهم يعرفون وش المتطلبات الرئيسة ويحاولون يعني يقدمون البيانات المتوفرة، وتضيف قيمة للمستثمر المحلي اللي هو السعودي بالذات، أنه لما يستثمر في منتج معين ولا يستثمر في شركة معينة أنه أقل شيء عنده يعني رأي آخر من جهة مستقلة بتقييم ذلك المنتج.
شكرا لك. بس الأستاذ منيش عنده كومنتس على هذا وبعدها يعني نختتم. تفضل.
To add to Fawaz's point, which he very validly made, these international ratings are based on regulations which are international. It is not in totality, these regulations are not to be applied, especially sometimes in the local context. So when they rate an entity, they're rated from a perspective of a practice which is there in the United States or in the Europe, in the EU. But when we talk about Saudi context, there are some differences in regulation, there are differences in terms of understanding the strength of the business. So which a local agency would do a better job than an international agency in actually understanding the strength of a local corporate.
شكرا للزملاء. طبعا على أساس أن هناك الحقيقة محاضرة وجدول الملتزمين فيه جميعا، فما يسعنا في هذه الختام إلا أن نشكر الزملاء المتحدثين، الأستاذ فواز الفواز والأستاذ عرفان والأستاذ منيش على هذه المحاضرات القيمة والمعلومات الجيدة، ونشكر لكم حضوركم وتفاعلكم. طبعا الجلسة القادمة سوف تكون على حسب ما ذكر لي المنظمين الساعة 12:15، فهناك فترة توقف لربع ساعة تقريبا. شكرا لكم جميعا.
Thank you.